Kethver stood at attention in the command center of the great warship, Eternal Glory. His purple skin gleamed under the bright lights, and his 4 arms remained perfectly still at his sides. The tall Zephyrian warrior had fought in 30 battles. Across the galaxy, he was proud of his record. Every enemy had fallen before him. Commander Zalthek walked around the hologram table in the center of the room. The blue light from the star maps reflected off his armor. Other officers watched from their positions along the walls. The air felt heavy with importance. "Warrior Kethver," the commander said in his deep voice, "you have served the Empire well. Your victories against the crystal beings of Arcturus are still talked about in the Academy. Your defeat of the Collector hive minds made you a legend." Kethver felt pride swell in his chest. He had earned every medal on his uniform. Every scar on his body told a story of victory for the Zephyrian Empire. "Thank you, Commander," Kethver replied. "I live to serve the Empire." Commander Zalthek activated the hologram. A small blue and green planet appeared in the center of the table. It spun slowly, showing continents and oceans. The planet looked peaceful, almost boring. "This is Terra," the commander said, "homeworld of a species called humans. They have been expanding their territory into our space. The High Command has decided they need to be stopped." Kethver studied the planet. It looked like many others he had conquered. Nothing special about it. The oceans were blue like most water worlds. The continents had the usual green and brown. Colors of plant life and dirt. What makes them dangerous? Kethver asked. It was a fair question. The Empire did not waste resources on weak enemies. The commander touched a control. The hologram changed to show human ships. They were small and simple looking. Their hulls were made of basic metal. Their weapons looked primitive compared to Zephyrian plasma cannons. "Intelligence reports say they are a young species," Commander Zalthek explained. "They only started traveling between stars about 200 years ago. Their technology is behind ours by several centuries. Their military has limited experience in real warfare." Another officer stepped forward. "Their ships are smaller than our fighters," he said with a laugh. "Their weapons can barely scratch our armor. This should be an easy conquest." Kethver nodded. He had seen this pattern before. Young species often grew too confident too quickly. They expanded into space before they were ready. When they met a real military force like the Zephyrian Empire, they learned their place in the galaxy. The hologram changed again. This time it showed a different planet. Rocky and red with small domed cities scattered across its surface. "This is Kepler 442b, Commander Zalthek said. "A human mining colony. They extract rare metals from the planet's core. The Empire needs those resources. Your mission is to capture the colony and remove the humans." Kethver studied the planet. The human settlements looked small and weak. The domes appeared to be made of simple materials. He could see mining equipment moving around the surface like tiny insects. "How many humans are on the planet?" Kethver asked. "About 50,000, the commander replied. "Mostly miners and their families. They have a small defense force, but our intelligence says it is poorly trained and equipped." The warrior calculated quickly in his mind. His battalion had 8,000 elite soldiers. Each Zephyrian was worth at least 10 human fighters based on their size and strength alone. With their superior weapons and armor, the battle should be over in a few days. "When do we leave?" Kethver asked. "Tomorrow," Commander Zalthek said. "The fleet is already prepared. You will travel with Admiral Mordak aboard the destroyer, Crimson Blade. 2 more destroyers and 6 cruisers will support your mission." Kethver felt excitement build inside him. A new conquest meant new glory for his record. The humans would learn what happened when they challenged the Zephyrian Empire. The next morning, Kethver boarded the Crimson Blade. The massive ship stretched for over a mile from front to back. Its dark metal hull was covered with weapon ports and shield generators. The ship could destroy an entire city with one blast from its main cannon. Admiral Mordak welcomed Kethvar to the bridge. The old admiral had gray streaks in his purple skin that showed his many years of service. His medals covered most of his chest. "Warrior Kethvar," the admiral said with respect. "I have heard great things about your battles. The humans will not know what hit them." "Thank you, Admiral," Kethvar replied. "How long will it take to reach their system?" 6 days at full speed," Admiral Mordak answered. "Our ships are much faster than anything the humans have built. They will not have time to prepare proper defenses." Kethvar spent the journey studying the intelligence reports about humans. The files were thin. The species was too new and unimportant for detailed study. Most of the information came from long-range scans of their colonies. Humans were smaller than Zephyrians. They stood about 6 feet tall on average, while Zephyrians reached 8 feet. Humans had only 2 arms instead of 4. Their skin was soft and came in different colors from pale white to dark brown. They had hair on their heads that grew in many different styles. The report said humans lived short lives compared to other galaxy species. Most died after only 70 or 80 years. Zephyrians could live for 300 years. This meant humans had less time to gain experience and wisdom. Their military organization seemed simple. They had armies, navies, and air forces like most species. Their weapons used chemical explosives and metal projectiles instead of energy weapons. Their armor was made of metal plates and cloth instead of energy shields. One thing in the reports caught Kethvar's attention. Humans seemed to fight among themselves often. Their home planet had a history of many wars between different groups of humans. Some of the wars had been very destructive. Kethvar wondered why a species would waste so much energy fighting itself. The Zephyrian Empire had been united for over 1,000 years. All Zephyrians worked together for the good of the Empire. This human habit of fighting each other proved they were not very intelligent. On the 4th day of the journey, the fleet picked up signals from the edge of the human system. The communications officer reported the contacts to Admiral Mordak. 3 small ships, Admiral, the officer said. They appear to be human patrol vessels. Very small. Each one is about the size of our fighter craft. Admiral Mordak laughed. They send fighters to challenge a fleet of destroyers. These humans are either very brave or very stupid. Kethvar watched the tactical display. The 3 human ships were moving toward the Zephyrian fleet at high speed. Their course would bring them into weapons range in about an hour. "Should we destroy them, Admiral?" the weapons officer asked. "Wait," Admiral Mordak said. "Let us see what they do. Perhaps they want to surrender without a fight." But the human ships did not try to communicate. They did not slow down or change course. They came straight at the Zephyrian fleet like they actually planned to fight. "Impossible," one of the bridge officers said. 3 tiny ships against our entire fleet. They must be planning to ram us in a suicide attack. Kethvar frowned. Suicide attacks were desperate moves used by species that had no hope of victory. But the intelligence reports said the humans still had their entire fleet defending other worlds. Why would they waste ships on a hopeless gesture? The human ships entered weapons range. Instead of attacking directly, they did something unexpected. They spread out and began moving in strange patterns around the Zephyrian fleet. They fired their weapons at long range, not trying to do serious damage, but just hitting the edge ships. "What are they doing?" Admiral Mordak asked. The tactical officer studied his displays. "It appears they are testing our defensive responses." "Admiral, they fire a few shots, then move away before we can return fire effectively." "Testing us?" The Admiral sounded confused. "Why would they need to test anything? Our power is obvious." Kethvar watched the human ships dance around the fleet. They moved fast and changed direction often. Their small size made them hard targets. Every time the Zephyrian gunners got a lock on one ship, it would disappear behind an asteroid or into a cloud of space dust. After 2 hours of this strange behavior, the human ships finally retreated toward their home system. They had not done any serious damage to the Zephyrian fleet. They had not even tried very hard to hurt the big ships. "Cowards," Admiral Mordak said with disgust. "They came to look at us and then ran away when they realized how outmatched they were." But Kethver was not so sure. The human ships had not acted like cowards. They had moved with purpose and skill. They had gathered information about Zephyrian weapons and defenses. They had learned something from the encounter. For the first time since receiving his mission, Kethver felt a small doubt in his mind. These humans might be more dangerous than the intelligence reports suggested. The Zephyrian fleet reached the planet Kepler 442b 2 days later. Kethver stood on the bridge of the Crimson Blade, looking at the red world spinning below them. The human mining colony was larger than the intelligence reports had suggested. Instead of a few small domes, the planet had dozens of settlements connected by roads and tunnels. Admiral Mordak studied the scanning reports with growing surprise. "The orbital stations are more heavily defended than expected," he said. "They have weapon platforms and shield generators around each major facility." Kethver counted at least 20 space stations orbiting the planet. Some were clearly mining platforms that processed ore from the surface. Others looked like defense platforms, with large cannons pointed outward into space. A few appeared to be shipyards where humans built their small vessels. "How many ships do they have?" Kethver asked the scanning officer. "We detect approximately 60 vessels in the system," the officer replied. "Most are small fighters and patrol boats. They have 3 larger ships that might be destroyers, but they are still much smaller than our cruisers." Admiral Mordak nodded with satisfaction. 60 ships against our fleet of 9 warships. Even if each of our ships only destroyed 6 or 7 of theirs, we would have them outnumbered." But Kethver noticed something odd about the human ship positions. Instead of forming up in defensive formations around their planet, the human vessels were scattered throughout the system. Some hid behind asteroids. Others moved through the debris fields left by old mining operations. A few seemed to be using the planet's moons as cover. "Admiral," Kethver said carefully, "the humans are not deploying their ships the way our tactical manuals predict. They should be massing their forces to defend the most important targets." Admiral Mordak looked at the tactical display again. "Perhaps they are inexperienced. Young species often make strategic mistakes when faced with a superior enemy." The first battle began when Admiral Mordak ordered his advance scouts to clear the outer orbital stations. 6 Zephyrian heavy fighters moved toward the nearest human defense platform. Each fighter was twice the size of the largest human vessel and carried enough firepower to destroy a small city. Commander Jake Morrison led 12 human fighters to intercept the Zephyrian scouts. His ships were tiny compared to the enemy, but they moved with surprising speed and coordination. Instead of meeting the Zephyrians head-on, the human fighters split into 3 groups and attacked from different angles. Kethver watched the battle. On the main screen, the Zephyrian pilots were skilled veterans who had fought in many campaigns. They should have been able to destroy the human fighters easily. But something went wrong. The human ships did not fight like any enemy Kethver had seen before. They did not stay in formation. They did not follow predictable attack patterns. Each human pilot seemed to make up his own tactics as the battle continued. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez flew her fighter through a field of metal debris that should have been impossible to navigate safely. The twisted pieces of old mining equipment created a maze that would challenge even the best pilot. But Rodriguez used the debris as cover while she targeted the weak spots on Zephyrian fighters. Her shots were precise and well-aimed. Instead of trying to destroy the enemy fighters with brute force, she targeted their sensor arrays and weapon systems. Within minutes, 2 Zephyrian fighters were blinded and helpless. "How is she doing that?" Admiral Mordak demanded. "Our fighters have superior armor and shields. Her weapons should not be able to penetrate our defenses." The tactical officer studied his instruments. "She is not trying to penetrate our armor, Admiral. She is targeting the gaps between armor plates and the joints in our shield generators. Her weapons are not more powerful, but she is using them more precisely." Another human pilot, Captain Ben Carter, led his squadron in an attack that made no sense according to military doctrine. Instead of engaging the Zephyrian fighters in space combat, Carter's ships rammed into the hull of a Zephyrian cruiser and began cutting through the armor with industrial cutting tools. "They are boarding us," the communications officer reported. With shock, "The humans are actually trying to board the relentless Fury." Keffer could hardly believe what he was hearing. Boarding actions were rare in modern space warfare because they were so dangerous and difficult. The attacking force usually suffered terrible casualties trying to break into an enemy ship. Most species only attempted boarding when they were desperate, but the human boarding party was not acting desperate. They moved through the corridors of the Zephyrian cruiser with practiced efficiency. Captain Carter's Marines used weapons and tactics that seemed designed specifically for fighting inside spaceships, instead of trying to capture the bridge or engine room like normal boarding parties. The humans targeted the ship's life support systems and computer networks. They did not want to control the ship. They wanted to make it helpless. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "we are losing contact with the relentless Fury. The humans have damaged their communication systems." Admiral Mordak's face showed growing anger and confusion. How can 50 humans disable a ship with a crew of 3,000? It should be impossible. Keffer studied the tactical reports coming from the boarding action. The humans were using psychological warfare along with their physical attacks. They had somehow accessed the ship's internal communication system and were broadcasting disturbing sounds and messages throughout the corridors. The human Marines also used the ship's own systems against the crew. They turned off lights in some sections and made them blindingly bright in others. They changed the temperature controls to make some areas freezing cold and others burning hot. They even altered the artificial gravity to make movement difficult for the Zephyrian defenders. But the most disturbing thing was how the humans seemed to show no fear. Sergeant Lisa Brooks led her squad in a direct assault against a Zephyrian strong point that was defended by heavily armed soldiers in powered armor. The odds against her were overwhelming. Any rational military commander would have found another way to attack such a well-defended position. Brooks should have called for support or tried to find a different route. Instead, she calculated that the shock value of a frontal assault would give her squad the advantage they needed. She was right. The Zephyrian defenders were so surprised by the suicidal charge that they hesitated for a few critical seconds. In those seconds, Brooks and her Marines reached the strong point and began their attack. The position fell within minutes. "These humans fight like they are insane," one of the bridge officers said with wonder. "They attempt things that should get them all killed, but somehow they succeed." Keffer was beginning to understand that. The intelligence reports had been completely wrong about human military capabilities. The reports had focused on their weapons and ships, which were indeed inferior to Zephyrian technology. But they had missed something much more important. Humans did not think about warfare the way other species did. Most galactic militaries followed established rules and procedures that had been developed over thousands of years of conflict. These rules existed because they worked. They reduced casualties and increased the chances of victory. But humans seemed to view every rule as a suggestion rather than a requirement. They looked at each battle as a unique problem that required a creative solution. Instead of following doctrine, they invented new tactics on the spot. The battle for the orbital stations continued for 6 hours. By the end, The Zephyrian fleet had achieved its objective of clearing the immediate space around the planet. But the cost had been much higher than expected. 3 Zephyrian cruisers had been damaged or disabled. 1 had been completely captured by human boarding parties and would have to be destroyed to prevent the humans from studying Zephyrian technology. Dozens of fighters had been destroyed or damaged. The human losses were also heavy, but they had accomplished something that should have been impossible. 60 small ships had fought 9 major warships to a standstill for 6 hours. More importantly, every human ship that was destroyed transmitted detailed tactical data about Zephyrian weapons and defenses to the other human forces. "Admiral," the communications officer reported, "we are intercepting human transmissions throughout the system. They are broadcasting technical specifications about our ships and weapons to all their remaining forces." Admiral Mordak looked puzzled. Why would they give away military secrets over open channels? Do they not understand that we can intercept their communications? Kethver was beginning to understand. The humans wanted the Zephyrians to intercept those transmissions. They were not trying to keep secrets. They were trying to share information as quickly as possible with every human in the system. Every mistake the Zephyrians made, every weakness they showed, every successful human attack was being broadcast to the entire human defense force. The humans were treating the battle like a learning exercise. They were using each engagement to teach their other forces how to fight Zephyrians more effectively. "Sir," the tactical officer called out, "the remaining human ships are repositioning. Their new formations are based on what they learned from the orbital battle." The invasion of the main human colony began 3 days after the space battle. Kethver led the first wave of ground troops down to the surface of Kepler 442b in heavily armored landing craft. The red planet's surface was covered with rocks and dust, broken up by the human settlements that looked like silver domes scattered across the landscape. Admiral Mordak had promised that the ground battle would be quick and easy. The humans had lost most of their ships in the orbital fighting. Their remaining forces were trapped on the planet with no way to escape. All the Zephyrians had to do was land their troops and accept the human surrender. But as Kethver's transport approached the largest human settlement, warning alarms began sounding in the passenger compartment. The pilot's voice came over the communication system with obvious worry. "We are taking fire from the surface," the pilot announced. "The humans have anti-aircraft weapons that were not detected in our scans." Through the small windows, Kethva could see flashes of light coming from the human settlement. The weapons were not the primitive missiles that intelligence had predicted. Instead, the humans were using modified mining equipment to launch chunks of metal at high speed toward the landing craft. "Mining equipment?" Kethver asked the soldier next to him. "They are shooting rocks at us?" "Not just rocks," the soldier replied, studying his scanner. "They have turned their ore processing machines into mass drivers. Each shot is a piece of refined metal moving at several thousand miles per hour." The landing craft shook as several projectiles struck its armored hull. The impacts were not powerful enough to destroy the ship, but they were strong enough to damage its systems. Warning lights flashed throughout the passenger compartment. "Emergency landing," the pilot called out. "We are going down half a mile from the target zone." Kethver's transport crashed into the rocky surface with a grinding impact that threw everyone against the walls. When the dust settled, the warrior found himself and his squad outside their planned landing zone. Instead of being in the middle of an open area where they could advance information, they were in a canyon filled with mining equipment and storage buildings. The human settlement was above them on the canyon rim. As soon as the Zephyrian soldiers left their damaged transport, the humans began shooting down at them from covered positions. But these were not the energy weapons or explosive bullets that most species used in warfare. The humans were throwing things at them, heavy pieces of metal, containers full of chemicals, even chunks of processed ore from their mining operations. The objects came flying down from the rim of the canyon like a deadly rain. "Take cover," Cuthbert ordered his squad. They moved toward the nearest building, which appeared to be some kind of equipment storage facility. The structure was made of simple metal walls and looked like it would provide good protection. But when the Zephyrian soldiers reached the building, they discovered that the humans had prepared a trap. The storage facility was filled with containers of mining chemicals that exploded when disturbed. The blast knocked down half of Cuthbert's squad and filled the air with toxic smoke. "Fall back," Cuthbert called through his communicator. "Regroup at the landing site." But as his soldiers tried to retreat, they found that the humans had moved heavy mining equipment to block their escape routes. Massive machines that normally dug ore from the ground had been repositioned to create barriers and defensive positions. The humans were using their entire industrial infrastructure as a weapon system. Every piece of equipment in their settlement had been turned into something that could hurt or delay the Zephyrian forces. Governor Kate Phillips spoke to the human defenders over loudspeakers mounted throughout the settlement. Her voice was calm and steady, giving orders like she was running a normal work shift instead of fighting for her life. "Mining Team 7, please redirect the conveyor system to Section 12, she announced. "Engineering Team 3, we need the power rerouted to the north defensive grid." Cuthbert realized that the humans were treating the battle like a complicated work project. They were using the same organizational systems and communication methods that they used for mining operations. Every civilian in the settlement knew exactly what to do because they had been practicing these procedures for months. Major Chris Thompson commanded the Colonial Defense Force, but his soldiers were not professional military personnel. Most of them were miners, engineers, and technicians who had been given basic weapons training. They should have been easy targets for Cuthbert's elite troops. Instead, Thompson's forces proved to be incredibly difficult to fight. They knew every tunnel, every building, and every piece of equipment in the settlement. They used this knowledge to set up ambushes and escape routes that the Zephyrians could not predict. The humans had connected all their buildings with underground tunnels that were originally built for moving equipment and supplies. Now these tunnels became a hidden highway that allowed human defenders to appear anywhere in the settlement without warning. Cuthbert's squad would clear a building of human defenders, only to have the same humans attack them from behind an hour later. The defenders had simply used the tunnel system to move to a different part of the settlement and then come back to reclaim their previous position. "How many tunnels do they have?" one of Cuthbert's soldiers asked in frustration after the third time they had been ambushed by humans who should have been dead or captured. "All of them," Cuthbert replied grimly. "I think the entire settlement is connected underground." The siege turned into a grinding battle that lasted for weeks. Every day, the Zephyrian forces would capture more of the human settlement. Every night, the humans would use their tunnel system to take back some of what they had lost. The humans also proved to be masters of improvised warfare. Dr. Rachel Stone was the colony's chief medical officer, but she had become something much more dangerous during the siege. She studied captured Zephyrian equipment and wounded soldiers to learn about their biology and technology. Dr. Stone's medical knowledge became a weapon as she shared information about Zephyrian weaknesses with the other defenders. She discovered that Zephyrian armor had vulnerable joints that could be damaged with precise strikes. She learned that their communication systems used frequencies that could be jammed with modified medical equipment. Most disturbing of all, Dr. Stone figured out how to use Zephyrian medical supplies against them. She created gas mixtures that were harmless to humans, but caused Zephyrian soldiers to become sick and disoriented. She turned their own first aid equipment into traps that would injure anyone who tried to use them. "She is a doctor, Admiral," Mordok said in disbelief when he received reports about Dr. Stone's activities. "How can a medical officer be more dangerous than their military commanders?" Cuthbert was beginning to understand that humans did not think about jobs and responsibilities, the way other species did. A human doctor was still a human, which meant she would use any knowledge or skill she had to fight for her people. The humans did not separate their civilian and military roles during a crisis. The mining engineers became weapons experts who turned industrial equipment into cannons and bombs. The computer technicians became intelligence officers who intercepted Zephyrian communications and spread false information. The maintenance workers became saboteurs who damaged Zephyrian equipment with tools and techniques they used for repairing mining machines. Every human in the settlement was a potential soldier, spy, or weapons maker. The Zephyrians found themselves fighting not just against the Colonial Defense Force, but against the entire population of 50,000 people. The psychological pressure on Kethver's forces grew worse as the siege continued. The humans did not just fight with weapons. They fought with words, sounds, and images that were designed to break down Zephyrian morale. The humans had learned to hack into Zephyrian communication systems during the space battles. Now they used this ability to broadcast disturbing messages directly to individual soldiers. The messages were personal and specific, targeting each soldier's fears and doubts. "Warrior Kethver," a human voice said through his helmet communicator. "One night, do you ever wonder why your commanders sent you to fight a species they knew so little about? Do you think they care if you survive this battle?" The voice belonged to a human woman, but she spoke perfect Zephyrian with no accent. She knew details about Kethver's military record and personal history that should have been classified information. "We know about your family on the home world," the voice continued. "We know about your daughter who wants to become a scientist instead of a warrior. We know about your concerns that the Empire is sending its best soldiers to die in pointless wars." Kethver tried to shut off his communicator, but the human transmission followed him to every frequency. The voice was not threatening or angry. It was sympathetic and understanding, like a friend who was worried about his well-being. "You don't have to die here, Kethvar," the voice said. "Your soldiers don't have to die here. We can end this siege anytime you want. Just take your forces and leave. We will not pursue you or attack your ships." The most disturbing part was that the voice was telling the truth. The humans had demonstrated that they could have killed many more Zephyrian soldiers if they had wanted to. As the siege entered its 6th week, Kethver found himself spending more time studying captured human communications than planning military operations. His intelligence officers had managed to intercept thousands of messages between different human units, and what he found in those communications changed everything he thought he knew about warfare. The humans were not just defending their colony. They were conducting the most comprehensive military education program that Kethver had ever seen. Every battle, every skirmish, every failed attack was being recorded, analyzed, and shared with human forces across the galaxy. Corporal Danny Walsh had become famous among the human defenders for turning a simple construction robot into a mobile weapons platform. The machine was designed for building roads and moving heavy equipment, but Walsh had modified it with armor plating and weapon mounts. "How did you know which modifications would work?" Dr. Rachel Stone asked Walsh during a recorded conversation that Kethver's team intercepted. "I didn't," Walsh replied with a laugh. "I just tried things until something worked. When the Zephyrians attacked the East Gate, I needed something big enough to stop their heavy armor. The construction mech was the biggest thing we had. And the weapon mounts? Those came from Nancy Green in engineering. She figured out how to attach our mining lasers to the robot's arms. The whole thing was her idea, really." Nancy Green was a civilian engineer who had never served in any military. But during the siege, she had become one of the most effective weapons designers in the Human Defense Force. She took equipment that was never meant for fighting and turned it into tools of war. What impressed Kethver was not just the individual creativity of humans like Walsh and Green. It was how quickly their innovations spread to other human forces. Within days of Walsh's success with the construction mech, similar machines were being deployed at human colonies throughout the galaxy. The humans had created a communication network that shared tactical information faster than any military organization Kethver had ever encountered. Every successful defense, every new weapon design, every lesson learned about fighting Zephyrians was transmitted across human space within hours. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we have intercepted another transmission from this colony to human naval headquarters. They are broadcasting detailed technical specifications about our plasma weapons." Kethver looked at the intercepted data. The humans had somehow measured the exact frequency, power output, and cooling cycle of Zephyrian plasma cannons. They had figured out how long the weapons took to recharge between shots, and how much energy each blast consumed. More disturbing was the tactical analysis that came with the technical data. Captain Steve Johnson, a human fighter pilot who had been shot down 3 days earlier, had managed to complete a detailed study of Zephyrian weapon systems before his death. Johnson's final transmission contained information that would help every human pilot who faced Zephyrian ships in the future. He had discovered that Zephyrian plasma cannons had a brief vulnerable moment during their charging cycle when the ship's shields were weakened. The plasma buildup draws power from the main shield grid for approximately 2 seconds, Johnson's report explained. A precisely timed attack during this window can penetrate Zephyrian defenses with conventional weapons. Kethver realized that Johnson had died not just as a pilot defending his colony, but as a researcher gathering intelligence for the entire human species. His death was not a waste or a tragedy to the humans. It was a valuable contribution to their collective knowledge about fighting Zephyrians. This pattern repeated itself throughout the siege. Every human who died managed to transmit useful information before their death. Every failed attack taught the humans something new about Zephyrian tactics and weaknesses. The humans were treating the entire war as a learning experience. They were not trying to win individual battles. They were trying to learn how to make their entire species better at fighting Zephyrians. Kethver's intelligence team intercepted a conversation between Governor Kate Phillips and Admiral Helen Carter, who commanded the human fleet in a nearby star system. The conversation revealed the true scope of human strategic thinking. "How much longer can you hold out?" Admiral Carter asked. "Maybe 2 more weeks," Governor Phillips replied. "We have lost too many defensive positions. The Zephyrians will break through our final lines soon." "I'm sorry we cannot send reinforcements," Admiral Carter said. "But the information you have provided is worth more than a rescue fleet. Every human world now knows how to fight these aliens." "That was always the plan," Phillips answered. "We knew from the beginning that we probably could not win this battle. But we can make sure that no other human colony makes the same mistakes we made." Kethver felt a chill run through his body as he understood what he was hearing. The humans had never expected to win the siege. They had planned from the beginning to lose this battle in order to help their species win the larger war. Governor Phillips and her people were sacrificing themselves to gather intelligence. Every day they held out gave human scientists and military planners more data about Zephyrian capabilities. Every Zephyrian victory taught the humans something new about their enemy. The most terrifying revelation came when Kethver's team intercepted technical specifications that the humans had developed about Zephyrian biology and psychology. Dr. Rachel Stone had been studying captured soldiers and equipment, but her research went far beyond simple medical analysis. Zephyrian military culture emphasizes individual achievement and personal glory. Dr. Stone's report explained. Their soldiers are trained to compete with each other for recognition and advancement. This creates opportunities for psychological manipulation. The report contained detailed recommendations for fighting Zephyrian forces based on their cultural weaknesses. The humans had identified ways to turn Zephyrian soldiers against each other by exploiting their competitive nature. They had learned how to use Zephyrian pride and honor codes as weapons against them. Zephyrian commanders will often refuse to retreat from losing battles because withdrawal is seen as cowardice, the report continued. This psychological inflexibility can be exploited by creating situations where retreat is the only rational option, but culturally unacceptable. Kefver realized that the humans had been studying him and his soldiers as carefully as they studied Zephyrian technology. Every conversation, every decision, every reaction was being analyzed to find patterns and weaknesses that could be used against future Zephyrian forces. The humans were not just fighting a military war. They were fighting an anthropological war, studying their enemies like scientists studying laboratory specimens. Another intercepted message revealed how quickly human tactics were evolving based on the intelligence gathered during the siege. Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos, who commanded the defense forces on a human world called Proxima 7, had implemented new fortification designs based on lessons learned from the Kepler 442b siege. We are using the mining equipment modification techniques developed by Nancy Green, Santos reported to Human Naval Command. We have also implemented the tunnel defense systems that proved so effective against Zephyrian ground forces. Commander Tony Richards, who led a fighter squadron defending another human colony, had developed new attack formations based on the flight patterns used by Amy Rodriguez and Jake Morrison during the space battles around Kepler 442b. The dispersed attack method allows us to gather tactical intelligence while minimizing losses, Richards explained in his report. Each engagement teaches us more about Zephyrian defensive capabilities without exposing our main force to unnecessary risk. Kefver began to understand the true horror of fighting humans. Every battle against them made them stronger and more dangerous. Every victory the Zephyrians achieved gave the humans new information that they shared with their entire species. The humans were not fighting to win territory or resources. They were fighting to evolve. Each engagement was making them better soldiers, better strategists, and more dangerous enemies. The final piece of the puzzle came when Kefver intercepted a message from Admiral Helen Carter to the human government. On Earth, the message contained strategic recommendations that chilled him to the bone. The Zephyrian Empire relies on traditional military doctrine and predictable tactics. Admiral Carter's report explained. They expect their enemies to fight according to established rules of warfare. Our advantage lies in refusing to follow those rules. Recommendation: avoid large-scale fleet battles where Zephyrian numerical and technological superiority would be decisive. Instead, focus on small unit actions, guerrilla tactics, and psychological warfare. Make every engagement a learning opportunity. Long-term strategy: use each defeat to gather intelligence about Zephyrian capabilities. Share this intelligence with all human forces. Transform our entire species into experts at fighting Zephyrians. Eventually, they will find that every human they encounter knows exactly how to defeat them. Kefver realized that the humans had developed a military strategy that was unlike anything in galactic history. Instead of trying to defeat their enemies through superior force or technology, they were trying to out-evolve them. The final assault on the human colony began at dawn on the 7th week of the siege. Kefver led his remaining forces against the last human stronghold, a cluster of connected buildings at the center of the settlement. His soldiers were tired, and their equipment was damaged, but they still outnumbered the human defenders by more than 10 to 1. Admiral Mordak had grown impatient with the length of the siege. "End this today," he ordered from orbit. "The High Command is asking questions about why it takes 2 months to defeat 50,000 primitives." Kefver understood the Admiral's frustration, but he also knew that the humans in the final stronghold would not surrender easily. Governor Kate Phillips had proven to be a brilliant tactical commander who used every advantage the terrain and equipment could provide. The attack began with a massive bombardment from Zephyrian artillery. The big guns fired plasma charges that should have reduced the human buildings to rubble within minutes. But when the smoke cleared, most of the structures were still standing. How are those buildings still intact? Admiral Mordak demanded over the communication link. Kethver studied the damage reports. They have reinforced everything with mining equipment. The walls are lined with processed metal ore that disperses our plasma charges. The foundations go deep underground where our weapons cannot reach them. The humans had turned their final stronghold into a fortress using industrial materials and techniques. Instead of military armor, they used the refined metals from their mining operations. Instead of energy shields, they used layers of rock and concrete that absorbed and scattered Zephyrian weapons fire. When the ground assault began, Kethver forces encountered defenses that seemed designed by someone who understood exactly how Zephyrian soldiers fought. Every approach route was blocked by obstacles that forced the attackers into narrow passages where their superior numbers meant nothing. The humans had placed their defensive positions to take advantage of every weakness that Dr. Rachel Stone had discovered in Zephyrian armor and tactics. They knew exactly where to aim their weapons for maximum effect. They knew how long Zephyrian soldiers could fight before needing to rest. They knew which psychological pressure points would cause Zephyrian units to make mistakes. They are fighting like they have been studying us for years, one of Kethver's squad leaders reported. Every move we make, they have a counter-move ready. That was exactly what had happened. The humans had been studying Zephyrian forces for 7 weeks, learning from every engagement, recording every tactic, and sharing their knowledge with every defender in the stronghold. The battle continued for 6 hours. Kethver's forces gradually pushed the human defenders back from one position to another, but each victory cost more than it should have. The humans made the Zephyrians pay for every meter of ground with blood and time. Finally, as the sun began to set over the red planet, the last human defensive position fell. Governor Phillips and the surviving members of her command staff were captured in the Central Communication Center. Dr. Stone was found in what had been the medical facility, still working on her research even as Zephyrian soldiers broke down the doors. But the victory felt hollow to Kethver. His forces had lost over half their soldiers taking the colony. The human defenders had been outnumbered and outgunned from the beginning, but they had made the Zephyrians pay a terrible price for their conquest. More disturbing was what happened in the final moments of the battle. Instead of destroying their equipment and records, the humans made sure that their research data was transmitted to the rest of human space. Their last act was to send a complete analysis of the siege to every human military commander in the galaxy. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "the humans are broadcasting surrender terms to Admiral Mordak. They want to negotiate the evacuation of their remaining civilians." Kethver expected the humans to beg for mercy or try to bargain for their lives. Instead, Governor Phillips made an offer that surprised everyone. "We surrender the colony to the Zephyrian Empire," Phillips announced over the communication link. "In exchange, we request safe passage for our non-combatant personnel to leave the planet. We also request that our wounded soldiers receive proper medical treatment according to galactic conventions for prisoners of war." Admiral Mordak accepted the terms immediately. The Zephyrians had won the battle and captured the planet. The mining facilities and orbital stations now belonged to the Conquest Empire. There was no reason to refuse a reasonable surrender offer, but as Kethver watched the human evacuation ships leave the planet 3 days later, he realized that something was terribly wrong. The humans were not acting like a defeated people. They were calm, organized, and even seemed satisfied with the outcome of the siege. Why did they look like they won? One of his soldiers asked as the last human transport disappeared into space. Kethver had been wondering the same thing. The humans had lost their colony, most of their military equipment, and hundreds of their people. But they acted like they had accomplished exactly what they set out to do, The answer came when reports began arriving from other fronts across the galaxy. Human colonies that had never been attacked were implementing defensive measures based on the Kepler 442b siege data. Human military units were using tactics and weapons that had been developed during the battle for the mining colony. Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos on Proxima 7 had turned her entire planet into a fortress, using construction techniques learned from the human engineers on Kepler 442b. Commander Tony Richards was leading fighter squadrons that used attack patterns developed by Jake Morrison and Amy Rodriguez. Every lesson learned during the siege was being applied by human forces throughout the galaxy. The sacrifice of one colony had educated an entire species about how to fight Zephyrians. 6 months after the siege ended, Kethver received new orders from the High Command. The Empire was planning to attack another human world, and his experience fighting humans made him the logical choice to lead the assault. But when Kethver studied the intelligence reports about the new target, he found that everything had changed. The humans on this world had implemented every defensive innovation that had been developed during the Kepler 442b siege. They had weapons designed specifically to exploit Zephyr weaknesses. They had tactics that countered every standard Zephyrian military doctrine. The attack was a disaster. Kethver's forces were defeated so completely that he barely escaped with his life. The humans fought with a level of skill and knowledge that should have taken decades to develop. But they had learned it all in 6 months by studying the data. From one siege, more attacks followed, each one more difficult than the last. Every engagement with humans became a nightmare of perfectly planned defenses and precisely targeted counterattacks. The humans seemed to know exactly what the Zephyrians would do before they did it. The worst part was that the humans continued to learn from every battle. Even when Zephyrian forces achieved victory, the humans managed to gather new intelligence. That made the next battle harder to win. A year after the siege of Kepler 442b, Kethver found himself assigned to a desk job at military headquarters. The High Command had concluded that fighting humans was too dangerous for their best officers. Too many experienced commanders had been lost in battles against an enemy that grew stronger with each engagement. Kethver spent his days writing reports about human military capabilities and trying to develop strategies that might work against them. But every strategy he proposed was countered by new human innovations that seemed designed specifically to defeat Zephyrian tactics. The humans had become the perfect enemy. They learned faster than the Zephyrians could adapt. They shared knowledge more efficiently than any military organization in galactic history. They treated every defeat as an opportunity to improve rather than a reason to despair. 2 years after the siege, the Zephyrian Empire stopped attacking human colonies altogether. The cost in soldiers and ships had become too high. Every battle against humans resulted in heavy losses and provided the enemy with new intelligence that made future battles even more difficult. The human expansion across the galaxy continued unopposed. Not because humans had superior weapons or larger armies, but because they had become impossible to defeat through conventional warfare. Kethver often thought about Governor Kate Phillips and Dr. Rachel Stone during his final years of military service. They had known from the beginning that they could not win the siege of their colony. But they had turned their defeat into a victory for their entire species. The humans had discovered something that no other species in galactic history had understood. Individual battles did not matter. Individual worlds did not matter. What mattered was the knowledge gained from every engagement and the ability to share that knowledge with the entire civilization. The nightmare of fighting humans was not their weapons or their courage or their tactics. The nightmare was that every time you fought them, you taught them how to be better at fighting you. And they never forgot what they learned. In his final report before retirement, Kethver wrote a warning that he hoped future Zephyrian commanders would read and understand. Humans do not fight to win battles, he wrote. They fight to learn how to win wars. Every engagement makes them stronger.